evening. Welcome to the Los Angeles World Affairs Council and Town Hall. I'm Kim McCleary, President and CEO, and it's my very great pleasure to welcome you to our members-only special film series. For those of you who would be liking to ask questions today, there's a control panel on the right-hand side of your screen where you can type in your questions. Jessica DeGanzik, our Vice President of Events, will be managing your questions during the Q&A portion of today's program, which will start in about 30 minutes. It is such a pleasure to have Kevin Goetz back again to moderate today's program, the conversation about the film Stray, an Istanbul story. We have Elizabeth Lowe, a phenomenal filmmaker. Kevin, thank you so much. It is such a pleasure to have you back moderating our special film series. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kim. It's a pleasure to be here. It really is. And I'm thrilled to be on the board as well. And it's a wonderful organization. I hope we can get the word out for many more events in the series.
Thank you, Kevin.
So with that, I'd like to waste no time and introduce a wonderful filmmaker, Elizabeth Lowe, who was our director and producer, cinematographer, and editor of the movie that you all saw, Stray. Elizabeth is an award-winning filmmaker. She has worked and been on broadcast and international movie theaters, including the Sundance Film Festival, Tribeca Film Festival, Hot Docs, True False, BAM Cinema Fest, New York Times OpDocs, and PBS's POV. She was named one of the 25 new faces of independent film by Filmmaker magazine in 2015, and was featured in the 2015 Saatchi & Saatchi New Directors Showcase at Cannes Lion. She was selected for the New York Film Festival Artist Academy in 2018 and the Locarno Film Festival Filmmakers Academy in 2019. Her work is played at over 100 film festivals, and she's won numerous awards. She was born and raised in Hong Kong, where she resides today. She holds a BFA from New York University's Tisch School of the Arts and an MFA from Stanford University. Stray is her feature film debut. Please join me in welcoming the wonderful Elizabeth Lowe. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Hello, I'm so glad to be here.
Well, we're thrilled to have you, and let me start off by saying, wow, what a movie, what a film.
Thank you so much.
It's a
beautiful.
beautiful
It was quite an
movie.
experience making it.
It's a beautiful movie, and you know, I do want to start with some questions about the actual filmmaking of Stray, but then I really want to spend more time almost on the kind of kind of political kind of effects that the movie brings forth and had on you as a filmmaker, and of course us as the viewer. This is the World Affairs Council, so we're really interested in that kind of social conversation. But I must ask you to start off by telling us, how did you do it? How did you get so up close and personal with these beautiful dogs?
I think it was like a really simple operating principle. If you're kind to dogs, they'll be kind to you. And in Turkey, they're so well socialized that they completely understood how to navigate around people. And so when I approached them with my camera and my huge rig with the stabilizer and the support mechanisms, they were unfazed. And Zeytin in particular, the star of the film, was really unique, I think, compared to other dogs, because a lot of other stray dogs that we tried to film with, they would follow us back. They would interact with the camera a lot. And that sort of defeated the purpose of the film, which was to follow a dog and see where that took us in Istanbul, to see like what sections of society it would come across. And Zeytin fulfilled that mission because she was so independent and stubborn as a dog. Like, I tried to put a leash and a collar on her once, but she refused to move the moment I put the collar on and the leash on. So I think that spirit is what sort of made her the star of the film. and allowed us
How,
to lead us
how
into
did
places that, I wouldn't expect.
how did Zayton get her name?
So her name comes from the young Syrian men who named her Zeytin, which means olive in Turkish. I think maybe because her face looks a bit like an olive, or perhaps it's her eyes. So it's a name, but she actually went by different names throughout the city. Different cafe owners would call her different things.
What drew you to this story? What drew you to wanting to take on this world as a filmmaker?
Of course, it comes from a very personal place. I love dogs. I had a childhood dog growing up, and when he passed away, I remember feeling like I had to suppress my grief because he wasn't a human family member. But that really led me to question, the status of beings, different beings, and certain species being categorized as second or third class citizens in our world. And so I thought, if I focused a film around a stray dog, what would it reveal about our human society? And Turkey was one of the first spots that we went to. We had originally intended to do a global study of a cultural comparison of how the status of stray dogs in different cultural contexts. But Turkey at the time in 2017 to 2019 was undergoing so much turmoil socially. We also wanted to see if this peripheral gaze of stray dogs could offer a window and take the pulse of what was happening in not only Turkey, but the world.
How did you even know that this was going on in Turkey?
So I was researching what countries had huge stray dog populations and which ones had interesting relationships with them. And Turkey's by far was the most fascinating.
Oh, so
As the Ottoman.
sorry, so you took Turkey, you chose stray dogs first, and then
Yes.
researched the best place
Yeah.
to tell your story. Explain that, please. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so I found out that in Turkey in the 1900s, as the Ottoman Empire was crumbling, under the Ottomans, stray dogs flourished also. But a British diplomat came to Istanbul, was chased by a pack of dogs in 1910, and he fell to his own death. But in retaliation, the British government forced the Sultan to round up all the stray dogs of Istanbul, and exile them to this island where they starved to death. And shortly afterwards, huge fires broke out because there were no dogs to warn the citizens, and World War I happened. So Istanbulites began to see the exiling of the dogs as a curse on their city and their country. And so over the next 100 years, even as the government tried to westernize and eradicate stray dogs from their streets, in order to conform to these Western ideals of what a clean city looks like, the people really fought against that, and they protested a lot in 2004 for the dogs. And then because of those protests, mass protests, these laws that prevent you from euthanizing any dogs or even holding them in captivity if they're healthy were passed. And that's why there's such a huge and thriving population today in Turkey.
What kind of government? What kind of government do they have? And is it obviously the people had an impact on the ordinances and policy?
Yeah, I mean, so the animal rights issue seems to be a sort of bipartisan issue in Turkey, and actually very recently they're passing these laws that are really progressive animal rights laws that improve protections against animals and even try to institute sort of educational curriculums at a grade school level, teaching a culture of sympathy towards animals, which is incredible if you imagine trying to institute that anywhere in the world. And that was a bill that was being passed that all politicians in Turkey agreed on, even Erdogan.
I've often heard that you can judge a society based on how they treat their artists.
Their artists.
I think you can also base a society on how they treat the either disenfranchised, in this case, their animals, their pets. They didn't see them as pets, I imagine, since 1909. Since 1909, in that century where they were really cruel and euthanizing them. Correct?
Yeah, I mean they're communally taken care of. When I was in Turkey and I would try to put collars on the stray dogs to track them, I put little GPS collars that were tiny onto the dogs. People would always come up to us, me and my co-producer, and ask, what are you doing? Don't take these dogs away. These dogs belong here. So they were very protective of every single, seemingly anonymous random stray dog on the street.
Are you talking about the ear piece, the ear tracking,
No,
or is that?
so the ear tracking, that's from the government. Whenever they're vaccinated, the government will tag the dogs. I was trying to put on GPS little tracking collars that would allow me to find the same dogs over and over again
So
every
I
night.
have to ask you, how did you decide on focusing on Zayton and Nazar and Kartal specifically? How did you choose those three dogs? There were others, obviously, but those three dogs as your leads, if you will.
I think so. Zayton had this independent spirit. She was friends with Nazar, and a big reason why they were really compelling to me. And their range within Istanbul was much wider, I feel like, than other stray dogs, because they had this on and off again relationship with the young Syrian men who are refugees from Aleppo, living in Istanbul, who are making a living on the streets. And then Kartal inevitably joins their motley crew, but it was the warmth that they gave each other, the dogs and the boys, the literal warmth and also at night, and then also the emotional warmth. Because I really sensed that the young men from Syria, if the dogs weren't part of their little sort of gang, they would have felt far more adrift in the city of Istanbul. They saw a sense of belonging in the dogs that was really profound, I think, despite not having homes.
You have a beautiful, empathetic essence about you, and I'm curious to know that I'm getting, and I can't imagine our viewers aren't getting. So I'm curious, what's the sort of statement or sort of thing that you were going for uh, as a filmmaker that you wanted to communicate through this film? Like, what's the POV, if you will?
Yeah, I think primarily I wanted to communicate a dog's POV. I wanted to sort of allow audiences to be enveloped in a worldview outside of humanities, because I think a human-centric worldview is so toxic and has destroyed so much of our planet and causes so much pain. And and so I really wanted the narrative to focus around dogs. But over the course of filming, what I realized was dogs are inextricably linked to humans. And it was the relationships that they had with the different populations within the city that was really fascinating and inevitable and organic to the dog story as well, which is why they make its way into the film. Like, I don't think I intended to set out to make a film that sort of addressed some of the refugee crisis that's happening in Istanbul, but I would have had to very intentionally turned my camera away from that and to avoid it, because it was everywhere. And the dogs, because they're stray dogs and they occupy public spaces and they're not allowed into private spaces, the types of beings and groups of people that they're going to encounter are also people who are often in public spaces, whether it's older men, getting warmth by a bonfire, or the young men from Syria, or women who are marching on the streets, or musicians who are making a living busking on the side of the road. So I kind of also knew that the stray dog would take us to the cracks of society and offer
Funny,
us a window.
it's funny. The dogs certainly don't see the refugees, and they see the humans. They see
Yeah.
there's no discriminating against anything
No.
except where can I have a nice my next meal, and
Yeah.
right. Uh,
Yeah.
I'd like to know your personal feelings about this premise of allowing these dogs to roam free, if you will. And perhaps I might be oversimplifying the term roaming free, but it sounds sounds like what's the word, idyllic. It sounds like
Mhm.
the perfect, you know, sublime thing that they can live on the streets. Uh, it's not perfect, is it?
No, I can completely understand your skepticism. Of course, dogs get sick, dogs get old, and when they don't have a personal, like, person who's responsible for them, that can be problematic. But over the course of making this film and showing this film, I've grown very passionate personally about this idea that why aren't our streets filled with stray animals? I think we tend to think of countries and cities that have huge stray populations as being inhumane or not taking care of their animals. But it, like, when you realize that in our cities, in LA or New York, the fact that there are no stray dogs around, that means that we're killing most of them, or forcing them to languish in cells for the rest of their lives unless they're adopted.
Let me
Which
play
is,
let me play devil's advocate to that, if I may,
yeah,
which
yeah,
one could argue that, at least I heard this information during the pandemic, that so many of the shelters and
yeah,
pounds didn't have any dogs left. They were adopted.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so
yeah.
are they really killing them? Or is it better for a society to put a spade and neutering program in place, as opposed to, um, certainly as opposed to euthanizing,
Yeah.
or sheltering, or letting them go free?
So in Turkey, they do have a spay and neuter program. Um, they pick them up, they vaccinate them, they'll neuter and spay them, and then but required by law to drop them back off where they found them, which I think is a profound level of respect for a dog. And it's a way of finding a compromise between being tolerant of other species living in your city, but also not allowing them to overpopulate. And there's actually this New York Times article about stray dog culture, about how dogs always have evolved to thrive on our peripheries off of our trash. And the amount of dogs that there are is dictated by how much trash there is and how much we produce that we don't eat. And I think in America, millions and millions of dogs. I don't know what the number is exactly these days, but it's millions of dogs get euthanized. And despite the pandemic, enabling people to adopt dogs and inspiring them to, which I think speaks to how much we love dogs and other species and need them, especially in times of turmoil. It's not enough. And I think based on how I saw dogs were integrated in Istanbul, they were so smart. They knew how to navigate traffic. And if you allow dogs that freedom, they will figure it out. And also people cared for them. People, when they were sick, people would call the municipality to say, hey, the dog is sick. Can you pick him up? And we went to visit a lot of the shelters in Istanbul, and a lot of them were filled with either sick dogs or dogs who were on the mend, who would be returned back to the streets once they were healed, or if they couldn't survive on the streets, they would stay in the shelter.
Having traveled the world and being in many third world countries or underdeveloped countries, I can't help notice that it just breaks my heart. I mean, you have to understand, I'm a tremendous dog lover. In fact, when they asked me to moderate this, I almost didn't say yes because, and I hadn't seen the film yet, because anything with a dog and
No,
looking
I'm
at
the
them
same way.
anyway is like so painful for me, right?
Yeah.
But I'm so glad I did. But it also sparked a lot of questions in my mind. One of them, you were very articulate in expressing that it's less even about, I mean, a lot of cultures do have stray dogs, but it's the respect of the animal that the Turks seem to have
Yes.
adopted. That is the difference between
Yes.
having stray dogs in, say, one of the African countries or Latin American countries that don't have a handle on it, or some of the Asian countries that eat their animals or whatever it may be,
Yeah.
versus having a respect for the animal, a reverence for the animal,
Yeah.
and as a result, you can have this kind of utopian, not idyllic, the
Yeah.
word I was looking for, you, sir. Sorry. Yeah.
I mean, it's definitely cultural, the relationship to dogs, how we relate. And also, I think it's cultural how we perceive stray dogs as a problem. That comes from a cultural point of view, too, based on like what we were brought up with, which I had the same feelings as you initially, but seeing what was in practice in Turkey changed my mind. And I'm not sure about other countries that also have huge thriving stray dog populations, but I do tend to think like in Thailand, there's a lot of dogs there. It's people are feeding them, otherwise they don't thrive. So even if we may see a lot of mangy dogs everywhere, they're surviving because of human mercy, because people in the population are actively sustaining them. Otherwise, there wouldn't be huge stray dog populations. So I'm not totally sure, but at least Turkey was this incredible model where the law and the people's will was there to help the dogs thrive.
Well, thank you. Talk to me, Elizabeth, if you would, about the infrastructure that exists for the animals. For example, you said there was kind of, you call the municipality, or there's organization. What is there, a government arm that just handles the dog
Yeah.
policy?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's, so there's the city shelters that are managed by the government, who have a budget to provide all of this care for the stray animals, and they have feeding stations where they set out food every day for the animals, especially during the pandemic. Um, with the lockdown, the dogs probably didn't have as much access to restaurant goers' foods or even restaurants setting out their scraps, which people of the city did every single day, the butchers and the restaurant workers. But in addition to that, the government is providing kibble everywhere. And I have to say that this is Istanbul specific. A lot of other cities in Turkey don't have maybe as many resources or as much will to be as organized about caring for the dogs. So in other cities that I went to, like in Kars, which is on the Anatolian side of Turkey and much more remote, I could see a lot more dogs that were sick there on the streets or really hungry. But Istanbul is this special case where the government has got it together to take care of the dogs.
And is there a shots program, rabies and the,
Yeah.
some of the, parvo and that kind of thing?
Yeah. That's so when they get the tags, all those dogs have been vaccinated against rabies, parvo, all those diseases.
But I noticed a lot of dogs didn't have the tags.
Yeah, you'll see Zayton actually, because I filmed this over 3 years, when I started filming with her at first, she didn't have the tag. But when I returned in 2019 for a pickup shoot, then I saw she had the tag. So the dogs they're slowly picked up and vaccinated and spayed and neutered, which some of the dogs like Nazar wasn't.
So what is the life expectancy of these dogs?
So officially, they say it's 4, but I find that very hard to believe. Yeah, but I don't think that's true because my co-producers who are Turkish also say they think that that's not true at all, because you'll see on the streets, and you can see in the film, like there's that black dog that Zayton kind of wanders up to by the trash, who is very old, who is at least 8 or 9, you can tell by his fur. And the fact that year after year I could go back and find Zayton and she would always be well, I think is also a testament to how well taken care of the dogs are. It's supposedly 4, but I don't believe that for 1 second, because there were so many old dogs in the city who were, living their lives next to cafes and thriving off of the communities that they were a part of.
Do you advocate for something like this in the United States?
Yes, I would love it. I think if you think about all the dogs that are in shelters or who are put down, and you think about all the space that we have in a city like LA or New York or anywhere, if dogs can be socialized well enough, which is totally dependent on how people treat them collectively. Imagine if you could have a neighborhood dog who, has bonded to the cafes around it and, is living life on his or her own terms. And that was something I really missed after returning from Turkey to LA. I was able to, every time I left the restaurant in Turkey, in Istanbul, I'd be able to have someone to offer my leftovers to, which was such a fulfilling feeling of this act of mercy that you're participating on a daily basis. Whereas when I got back to LA, unless you happen to own a dog, you don't get to interact with other species. You're starved of that experience.
I need to ask you this. I mean, we can't deal with our own homeless population in Los Angeles with humans. And when I'm in a restaurant outside, I'm almost always responsive to someone coming over to a table outdoors and saying, "Can you help me? Can you help me?" But I mean, I can't even imagine a helpless dog coming up and not feeling just completely devastated. And anyone in my circle of friends I think would feel the same way. That's what I'm having trouble reconciling, because I hear what you're saying and it sounds like really profound, and it's a real philosophical kind of understanding. Is it really practical, and is it the right thing for the animal?
Yes. So I think there's a
I asked
huge
three
difference.
questions in that.
So I think, yeah, so I'm great to be challenged. So I think there's a huge difference between people who are homeless and their plight versus dogs who are quote unquote homeless, who live on the streets. Because I think what I saw in Zayton and Nazar, their experience of living on the streets was filled with joy. Whereas for the young men, it was a very different case. And I'm sure in LA, it's the same. It would be the same, because I think when a dog approached you in a restaurant asking for food, you wouldn't sense a desperation in them. At least in Istanbul, I would try to feed the dogs food because I would be trying to bribe them, like, hey, let's get going, let's start shooting. But they wouldn't take my food if they were sleepy, because they were able to find such a rich diet throughout the city. They could be very picky. They were far pickier than pets, because their diet is so rich, because they get to choose whatever they want to eat, bones, meat, whatever, not kibble. And so I think it's based on what I saw in Istanbul, it's completely practicable if there is a will there. Istanbul is this huge city of 15 million people, lots of traffic everywhere, and there's 130,000 dogs who are thriving there, and who every single one of them, I believe, has a name that's given to them by whoever is around them. That name changes.
There must be groups who are not into this and don't believe what you believe. What are they? Are they activist organizations saying you're?
No, I would say that
not the case.
Turkish people are really proud of their stray dog populations. I think I would tell people, like, even taxi drivers, like, oh yeah, if you're a stray dog in America, basically you either have to be adopted or you're killed or you're, put into a shelter. And they were appalled by that. They couldn't even imagine a world in which that was the case. And the dogs are not starving. So if you went to a restaurant and a dog came up to you, which often happened in Istanbul, they would just be sitting by you, giving you company. And if you wanted to throw them a scrap, they would take it gladly, maybe if it was tasty. But if it wasn't tasty, they would leave, So there's so much choice. You can sense there's a lot of choice and agency that these dogs have, which I think is a different relationship to dogs that we can aspire to. I personally don't probably think it's that realistic. I think once a society has turned their backs on the idea of stray dogs and has reframed it to be immoral, that it's hard to go back to a way of life where they're integrated.
It's an excellent point. When the dogs, about 45 minutes into the movie, there were 10 dogs packing and fights, and then they hosed them away. That was intense for me to watch, because I felt like they weren't necessarily wanted, but it didn't seem cruel to me. It just seemed like, where do we go next? And can you talk about that notion of packing? And are people, I don't know, do people get nervous? A young family, who have a child, let's say, and they walk out. I saw one kid with the father with this daughter feeding the dogs, but are they nervous that the dogs may bite them, or sitting in traffic? So an intersection,
I can describe.
What's the balance there?
Yeah, each of those scenes with the dog mob. So I think dogs do have a mob mentality. Once one starts barking, they all start barking. And once two dogs get in a fight, all dogs will sort of come around, and which was the situation with that mob of dogs that get broken up by the men with the hose. In those situations, when I see dogs sort of quote unquote misbehaving, acting like menaces or potentially nuisances, it makes me think, wow, what kind of society allows this, where they tolerate dogs when they're nuisances, when they're not behaving well, they're not calling up animal control and saying, there's a bunch of dogs here, let's round them up. They see them as having their dramas happening in the city, just like we have arguments.
We have arguments. That's interesting.
if we have an argument, do we get rounded up just because we have an argument? And so in Istanbul, I would always be amazed when the dogs were menaces. When they were menaces and barking at people, barking at cars, people had a high tolerance for that kind of behavior, which I find a reflection, a very good and positive reflection of Turkish people, the high level of tolerance. And then with that scene where Zeytin wanders into the traffic and sits down in it, and it seems quite dangerous, right? I cut
wanted
this.
to pull out my hair, and I don't even have any to pull out, you know?
So I should have probably left this in, but shortly after that, a woman and her family, they're walking by and they see Zeytin sitting in the middle and they start talking to Zeytin. They're like, "What are you doing, honey? Get out of the road. You better get out of the road." You know, they were very concerned for her. And then the other scene you're talking about, yeah, the man, the father with his daughter, his toddler daughter, he pushes her towards these gigantic dogs who they do not know, they don't know the intentions of, but these dogs are so well socialized and people trust them. They know that they're not going to bite.
When I was a little kid, my parents did that for me with the pigeons in Atlantic City on the boardwalk. Millions of, hundreds of pigeons, and we have these home movies walking into this, you know, what some call in New York flying rats, and yet they were, you know, it was the most exciting thing ever, and the girl had such joy.
Yeah.
She had such joy as she was, you know, going into that.
Yeah, I want to grow up in a world where, you know, where you can interact with the seagulls, the pigeons, the cats, and the dogs, all these animals that are very well adept at living among us.
Is there an attempt to get these dogs placed?
I think so. I did at a time film with organizations that tried to rescue specifically like golden retrievers off of the streets of different cities in Turkey and transport them to be adopted abroad. And the idea is that golden retrievers and other dogs that were formerly pets who look very different than Zeytin and Nazar in the film, who are purebreds, aren't as adapted to living on the streets, which may be the case. So there are organizations that rescue dogs who are not coping well.
Within the Turkish population is what I'm referring to. Within the Turkish population, do you sense that people want to adopt their own house pets, if you will?
So we did also film with a lot of Turkish animal lovers whose houses were filled with dogs. But I imagine if I moved to Turkey, I think I would turn into one of those people who, if I bonded with Zeytin and Nazar enough and I fed them often enough, I would welcome them into my home. And I think that's the situation there when people do that. Or maybe they see that this dog in particular isn't surviving well on the streets, so they take them in.
Very interesting. Well, going back, and before we move into questions, I could talk with you for so long about this subject, because it does spark a lot of discussion. I'm curious, after making the film, and it took you 3 years, you said, which is an extraordinary amount of time, perhaps not for a documentary, but still in all, a tremendous commitment of your time and your life. What would you suggest to the Turkish government to do to improve a program that's already seems to be working in your eyes, to make it even better, so that it does become a potential kind of you know, prototype for other cities around? What would you say to improve the already working program?
Yeah, so I think legally it's written in there that if you pick up a dog, vaccinate them, you have to return them to the place where they were found. But that particular law, I feel like, is not always enforced, where they will pick up dogs, vaccinate them, but then return them to the outskirts of Istanbul instead of the center, because they don't want the center overpopulated with dogs. And sometimes, and there have been movements within the government in the past to try to export dogs to the outskirts, to the forests, where there's hundreds of dogs, where there's some shots in the film, in the ending montage, you see hundreds of or tens of dogs walking towards the camera in an outskirts rural area. That's what happened. So I think the enforcement of those progressive policies is one area of improvement. But personally, I hope that what the film does is spark other governments or communities and dog lovers in different countries to either improve their stray dog populations or learn to embrace it and live with them the way the Turks have, or question, what does it mean that our cities are intolerant of any species other than ourselves, in a way, unless they're our own property, which I think is a really, problematic relationship with other species.
I think that's a beautiful sentiment to segue. The reason I say that is you have illustrated for us not only the dog's point of view and the dogs and how they're being sort of taken care of, but you're talking about a whole sort of shift in the human condition and the way in which we as humans can alter our behavior and a whole new understanding of how to embrace creatures other than humans in a society. And that is a really big shift for many folks. Animal lovers, I think, are which many people are, but the intensity of which my animal, my dog, as part of our family is,
Same.
I mean, it is the same as a child in
Yeah.
often for many of us.
Yeah.
So I
And
think
I
it
really
requires that kind of commitment and mindset change in order to adopt such a program and policy.
Yeah, and to question the beliefs that we've been brought up to understand the correct way of things, and to be open to other ways that maybe improve the lots of others. But I really appreciate the challenges that you've posed, the skepticism. It's important, I think, to grapple with these things. In other interviews, it hasn't happened yet.
Well, thank you for bringing that up. I do appreciate that. And I will say that we're going to turn it over, and I'm going to invite Jessica on the call with us to give you the opportunity to answer some of the questions of our other guests and members. So, Elizabeth, I thank you, and I'll circle back with you in just a moment.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Our first question, do you know what the Turkish government is doing to help their stray humans, the refugees that you followed, and their homeless population?
So what I've learned is obviously there isn't enough infrastructure support to support all the refugees that are coming into Turkey. Turkey has the largest population of refugees. I have to say, though, that now they are integrating more and more into Turkish society, where Syrians are working and becoming a part of the Turkish population, and there is not an assumption necessarily that they're going to be able to go back to Syria. So what I found quite incredible to me by being in Turkey was that across the political spectrum, there wasn't sort of an anti-refugee sentiment that could be stoked in the way that it's so easily stoked in Western Europe. I think because of Turkey's position bordering Syria. And when I would ask Turkish people what they thought of refugees, the Syrian ones that were coming in, they would say there are brothers who need help, and Turkey is always going to be a refuge for those in need. And this sounds like a very idealized version of things, but I truly believe that the people have a really high spirit of embracing the other, or embracing people who are in need. And it wasn't an issue that could be politicized across different political parties.
As a follow-up to that, have you been able to stay up to date on the status of the refugees that were in the film?
So they don't have phones, so I haven't been able to be directly in touch, but Zeynep Koprulu, who is my co-producer who's based in Istanbul, she will regularly run into them with Zeytin and Nazar and the usual crew, sort of basically living the same lives that they have been living as they did in the film. And we are trying to we haven't gotten distribution in Turkey, but we're trying to create impact screenings to try to connect with refugee organizations and also rescue animal rights organizations in Turkey to try to use the film to have some kind of impact.
What kind of permits did you need from the government to shoot there?
We just got sort of a general blanket permit, to film in the city. Yeah. And it was interesting because it changed the mood of the city, and the government changed. From 2017, it was very tense because they had just emerged out of all these terrorist attacks, and there were lots of protests and consolidations of power in the government. But in 2018, when we returned, it was the attitude towards filming was much more relaxed. And it was interesting because in 2017, I went as an American production, but and then 2000, which people were quite hostile towards. People would be like, "Oh, yeah, we don't want to make ourselves look bad to the West." But in 2018, I went back as a Hong Kong production because I couldn't get in as an American because of the tiff between Trump and Erdogan. And people treated me so differently as a Hong Kong citizen. They would say, "Oh, we have so much more in common with the East than the West," and it felt like a sense of solidarity. They were much more open to me filming. So it was interesting how people felt about the West versus the East there.
That's actually fascinating. That's actually fascinating. I want to also ask you, who financed the movie?
So we got support from Bay Area Video Coalition, ARRI, the Alexa camera brand. They gave us camera grants, and then Rooftop Films also gave us a grant. But mostly it was a really difficult film to pitch to funders. Most people couldn't imagine the film. And so I used a lot of my own personal savings. And also I took on all the sort of major roles to save money also.
Brava.
Nice. All right, I'm going to combine two questions here. Your film reminded me a bit of the film Kedi. Did you encounter many cats on the street as well, or is there a different relationship there? And then somebody else asked, besides dogs, how are cats or other stray animals perceived in Turkish society?
Yeah, I'm definitely aware of Kedi, and Kedi also speaks to the celebration of stray cat life. And I think cats are much less persecuted than dogs. They're much more tolerated in all societies probably, and it's the same in Turkey because they're smaller. There's less chance for them to become nuisances. And in the film, the dogs would often chase cats. And in one instance, Nazar, who is, I guess it turned out she was a really good hunter, actually. I was filming her stalking a cat, and I didn't think she would actually get the cat, but she got the cat. And then once I realized that, I had to put down my camera and stop because I realized she was going to kill the cat. So I stopped to rush to the cat and sound the alarm. And the moment I did, everyone around, once they were aware that this dog was attacking the cat, went to yell at Nazar, and then to save the cat and try to nurse it back to health.
Wait,
so
is that the scene in the beginning when the dog is rushing?
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
That was playful.
That was playful. So that didn't make it into the film because I stopped filming. Because I don't believe as a documentary filmmaker, you stop being a human being when you're engaging with your subjects in front of the camera.
Yeah. In Islamic culture, dogs are typically viewed as being unclean, and many Muslims will not keep dogs as pets in their homes, but may have hunting dogs. Can you talk about the shifts you encountered around people's views of dogs as pets versus city street companions?
This was really fascinating to me. That interview or the question brought on speaks to really well is that, yeah, they don't allow dogs into their home, which is why under the Ottomans, stray dogs were thriving on the streets in public areas. And even in the film, you'll see those security guards who love Kartal and the black and white family and are feeding them every night. They don't touch them with their hands because in their particular branch of Islam, it does cause pollution or undoes their prayer. And so you'll see them petting the puppies with their feet. But at the same time as they're not allowing dogs into their homes or touching them very intimately, they also are, I think, the working class Muslims of the city are also the backbone of allowing dogs to flourish because they're the ones who are feeding the dogs every morning, the butchers and the restaurant workers. Because I would ask a butcher that I would see every morning at 6 a.m. He would come out with a huge bucket of meat and just throw it to all the birds and the cats and the dogs. And I asked, why do you bother to do this? And he said, because his religion dictates him to feed the silent and those in need. So I think that attitude comes from a religious perspective too.
Thank you. Who cleans up after the dogs? And for those who pass away, do you see citizens grieving the loss of those community dogs? And how are the dogs treated when they have passed?
That's a really fascinating question. In the time that I was filming, I never encountered any dogs that passed away. And actually that makes me want to return. I would love to document sort of what would happen at the end of the life of one of these stray dogs. But my suspicion is that because every single dog that I saw on the streets of Istanbul either were elderly but still functional or not injured, I have this feeling that when they become really old, that people take them into the government, or the municipality comes to take them into the shelters where they probably go to die if they cannot be cured. But the fact that there weren't any injured or sick or severely elderly dogs that were dying on the streets, to me that means the government is picking them up. Because in other cities that wasn't the same case. In other cities you would see dog carcasses in places.
There's a woman in your film who says so and so, or you're going to get rounded up to the dog.
Yeah.
What does she mean by rounded up?
So those particular women who are commenting about Zeytin and calls her a stupid dog, like, what are you pooing everywhere? Oh, in regards to the pooping question, I think the government, city workers pick up the poop, but those are Chinese tourists who are unfamiliar with the system of stray animals in Istanbul and Turkey. So they're very intolerant of the idea that stray dogs are roaming freely, pooping everywhere, and able to invade their personal space. So to me, that was a showcase of the cultural difference. When your mindset is not trained to believe that other animals are allowed to coexist among you, you'll threaten them with being rounded up, which is what we do in the East and the West, I would argue.
So she actually thought that there was someone to call that would take them away.
I think she was just talking smack.
I know, but you know what I mean. You know what I mean. Like that.
I don't know why. Those two tourists cracked me up so much because they were just so mean. The things they said about Zeytin were so mean, and like throwing unnecessary threats towards this stray dog. But I love that moment.
Very nice. This next questioner says, I'm curious to know what role history has in your creative brainstorming for filmmaking.
World history?
What role history has in your creative brainstorming for filmmaking?
I think, especially in the case of this film, I wanted the way the film looks, because I filmed it with vintage Cook lenses, to look in a way like time travel, because I did feel like I was traveling back in time to a time when dogs lived among us. In most industrialized, modernized cities, that's no longer the case. But in Istanbul, they happen to have, I feel like the dogs have somehow slipped through the cracks of modernity and continue to exist among a middle income place. And so I wanted to capture this moment in history, because I feel like a lot of Turks would disagree with me, but I do think any population that is vulnerable and not at the sort of apex of the power structure could be scapegoated overnight. Their status, that a society can easily turn against their communally owned stray dogs, just as they did in Romania, because the government has decided that we need a scapegoat, blah, dogs, or other minority groups. And so I do fear a lot that in 10 or 20 years' time, if Turkey becomes much more economically advanced and developed, will they lose the will to protect their stray animals? And so to me, capturing this film in this moment for me, it's a historical moment, that these dogs are a part of the society today. And I don't think that's something to be taken for granted, because look at our cities it's no longer the case anymore. So history is always informing me, and that historical story with the British diplomat who came to survey the dogs and rounded them up. And actually the French, when they heard that the British were forcing the Turks to round up all their stray animals and get rid of them all, French entrepreneurs came to look to see how they could commoditize the dogs' bodies. There are written articles by French people saying, oh, here, the dog's fur can be worth this much. The meat, we can grind it up and do. So this is it's an attitude that I think comes from history, colonialism, capitalism, all of those things are in every story, including one about stray dogs.
Do you plan to make any other dog or animal related films?
I keep being drawn to dog topics, but I feel like I should stay away from that for a while. I think for my whole life, I want to commit making films that sort of progress our moral consideration outside of our own species. And I think cinema is perfectly adept at that. It's a medium that exists beyond words, that can exist beyond words. So I do want to commit myself to that. Not with every film, but the body of my work, I want it to be pushing that forward.
Where do your interests lie now? What do we expect to see Elizabeth doing in the foreseeable future?
I'm working on my second feature-length documentary in development, and I'm working on several different ideas that I can't speak about now. But I'm sure it will be akin to a lot of the work that I've done in the past and with Stray. Maybe not obviously, but
if you went back to Istanbul now and you met we don't know if the dogs are okay, but let's assume the three of them were there. Would they know who you were, do you think?
So when I went back in 2019 after a 1.5-year hiatus from filming the first time, I couldn't totally tell if Zeytin recognized me. I have a feeling that because she meets so many people throughout her life, I have a feeling when I started pulling out the camera and started like following her intensely the way I did the first time around, then probably something in her sparked like, oh, this is that one who like stalks me for 24 hours a day for months on end. Of that one, she's back. That's what my feeling was. I think, yeah.
I'd love to know. Oh, sorry, Jessica, did you have any other questions? Because I wanted to just segue to.
I was just going to do one more and then I'll turn it back over to you. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. This questioner says, I salute you for telling such a compelling and captivating story. As a young filmmaker, what 2 to 3 factors contributed to your success with this film? For example, family?
I think for sure I was able, because this is a non-commercial film idea and it was really difficult to pitch. I think because I was able to afford to use my own savings and know that I had a safety net, probably that allowed me to pursue this passion project in a way that had I been sort of forced to make a film that only met the market's demands, a film like this, it would be much harder for it to exist. So I'm really grateful to that. And I also understand that it's a huge problem that unless you have some kind of safety net, it's really difficult to pursue these passion projects that are independent films because you don't know if you'll be able to sell the film at the end. Thankfully, we have, and we've made back everything we've put in. But I don't know if this is like a fluke case or not. And going forward, I know that mode of filmmaking is not sustainable. So answering to your question, Kevin, the next projects that I make are, I think, going to have to be less naive, I think, and more in line with perhaps what the market wants in order to be a sustainable filmmaker.
As the head of a market research company and data analytics firm, I can make a claim here that any movie, if made and marketed for the right price, will make money. But that's just the problem, is many people make a movie for out of the realm of what the audience might be for. And there's ways to sort of scope that out earlier on. So I love that you're following your passion, and you can still probably follow your passion and make a responsible business decision. I want to also mention that documentaries right now, in my view, are the most compelling cinematic options out there. There's just one after the next, and they're great. And I think what the pandemic has done is really brought in a whole new audience for documentaries. So I'm hoping and praying that yours gets seen by so many folks who normally wouldn't necessarily see it because there's more opportunity. So I wanted to sort of end on this notion of talking about how you went to Magnolia to get them involved, the distributor, and also how people can spread the word about this to their socially and culturally responsible friends, so that we can help support the film.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Those words of encouragement mean a lot. Trying to release a film during the pandemic has been really strange and tough. So we got in touch with Magnolia through Dogwolf, which is our UK-based sales agent who took all the rights, the global rights for film.
Hold on. Was that sales organization named Dogwolf before you went to them?
Yes. Also, let me tell you.
Meant to be.
Oh,
I
for
don't know
sure.
what
Oh, for sure. And I met them through participating in things like IFP Film Week, all these labs that are for helping independent films. But so Dogwolf sold the film to Lucky Dogs in Scandinavia, and also Mongrel Media in Canada. Magnolia is one of our few distributors not named after a dog, which I'm sure is no coincidence.
So good. That is too good.
Yeah. And then, so if people want to spread the word, it's available everywhere on iTunes, YouTube. And if they are watching it with their dogs, we encourage people on Instagram or Twitter to tag @StrayDocFilm when your dog is watching it, and also hashtag #StrayWatchParty. We've gotten incredible.
Give those again.
Yeah. @StrayDocFilm, @StrayDocFilm. That's our Instagram handle and Twitter handle, and where you can keep up to date with what's happening with Stray. But you can also go see other dogs watching Stray in our stories, and the way dogs react to other dogs on screen is incredible. It brings me so much joy. And please, I would love everyone's dogs to be featured. And yeah, and to please spread the word.
As a member of the Motion Picture Academy, I will encourage my fellow members to support it as well, because wouldn't it be great for you to get some Academy consideration for next year?
Oh, thank you so much. We actually had our Academy run, or we had our campaign that we tried to do, but it was a really tough year because of us not having a brick and mortar premiere. Yeah, but thank you, Kevin. Please still spread it among your friends.
You know I will. And
thank you for giving us the opportunity to share it with our members of the council. Over the years, we've realized the work that documentary filmmakers can do to dive into these topics that we couldn't necessarily do in our in-person events has been such a blessing, because we get into these topics in ways that we couldn't do otherwise. So thank you so much for sharing this film with our audience. And Kevin, I'm going to officially turn this back over to you.
Thank you, Jessica. Again, Elizabeth, you're terrific, and I could spend another hour talking to you, and hopefully I actually will do that, because you're a filmmaker that I would love to keep tabs on and track and support your next movie if it's anything in the realm of this one. So thank you for sharing your story with us today, and for getting up probably at the crack of dawn in Hong Kong.
No, it's 9 a.m. right now, or it's 10 a.m. right now. So it's fine.
Well, for me, that's the crack of dawn. No, I'm joking. But still,
I think all filmmakers are nocturnal animals.
Anyway, enjoy the rest of your day. We will support your movie, and only the best. Great good luck to you. I'll invite Kim back in to sign us off, but take care.
Thank you so much, Kevin. This was such a joy to speak with you.
Thank you.
Elizabeth, we so appreciate you sharing this conversation about such a heartwarming story, and we wish you all the best, and we can't wait for your next film. And Kevin, sharing your expertise as CEO of Screen Engine and all of your movie expertise, we can't thank you enough for your time and expertise today. So thank you so much for moderating. You're the best.
Thank you, Kevin and Kim.